Welcome, everybody, and thanks for joining World Oceans Day. Sorry, let me get my things together here. Yes, happy World Oceans Day, everybody. Thanks for joining Point Blues live from the Farallones. We're going to get started in just a minute. I see we have 15 folks joining us via Zoom here, and we're also live streaming to Facebook. So welcome to all who are joining via Facebook. My name is Lishka Arata. I'm Senior Communications Coordinator for Point Blue. And I'm just going to do a little welcome and intro before handing it over to our Farallon biologists. So if you would like to share where you're joining from today in the chat, and any connection you have to the Farallon Islands National Wildlife Refuge, go ahead and share that in the chat. We'd love to see that. Yeah, so it's a pretty special World Oceans Day today. The conservation focus of this year's World Ocean Day is protect at least 30% of our blue planet by 2030. That's a really important conservation theme across the board that Point Blue is also part of. So aiming to protect 30% of our lands and oceans by 2030. And so I'm going to paste a couple links in the chat for everybody to take a look at the theme and the call to action for that. And then I'm going to share a link also to one of our blog posts that tells you a little bit more about Point Blue's involvement in the 30 by 30 effort. We'd love for you to learn a little bit more about that and get involved. So on this morning's World Oceans Day, we get the special opportunity to travel virtually to one of our longest running field sites on the Farallon Islands National Wildlife Refuge and learn from Dr. Mike Johns, one of our lead Farallon biologists, about some of our seabird science. So a little bit about Mike before I pass him the mic. Mike's kind of research focus is to understand how seabird populations are responding to climate variability and human-related threats and disturbance. So he's combining our long-term data sets from the Farallones with new information from tracking studies that we're doing and remotely derived environmental data. And he's modeling how these populations and individuals are responding to these threats. So pretty important work. And he's building upon all of the work that we've done at this long-term field station. Mike joined us as a summer seabird volunteer biologist in 2012, and he returned in 2014 as a program biologist. He recently completed his PhD at the University of Alaska Fairbanks in 2020, where he addressed questions related to age-specific reproductive strategies of Cassin's auklets. That's one of the focal seabirds that breeds on the Farallones that a lot of you probably know about. And he looked also at their winter dispersal patterns. So feel free to ask Mike any questions you may have about that cool research that he's done. And with that, I'm going to pass the mic to Mike. Over to you, Mike.
Can everyone hear me? Or can you hear the gulls? I guess nobody can respond because you're all, I'm getting a thumbs up, good. I'm just gonna pan away from this western gull nest now and get set up in our station. Stand by. So yeah, like Lishka said, welcome to the Farallones. We hiked up to the lighthouse today to give you guys a good view of the island, and which is typical for the Farallones. The fog has just rolled in, so it's a bit gray up here today, but you should be able to see some of the island behind me. Yeah, I guess want to start by just reminding everyone that it's World Oceans Day and that we are here to celebrate it. And we want to thank the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service for their their long-term partnership with this program. Like Lishka said, the Farallones program started in 1968, and it's been a really great cooperative relationship with the Fish and Wildlife Service to get all of our work done out here, and they support our logistics and keep the place running. So yeah, so World Oceans Day. This is going to be sort of an informal live event. This is peak breeding season at the moment, peak chick hatch. We monitor roughly 11 species of seabirds out here, and almost all of them have chicks at this point in some stage. So for those of you that tuned in to the Farallones Live, I think it was last month, we highlighted the Cassin's auklet chicks, part of our long-term studies with those Cassin's auklets. And those chicks are almost old enough to fledge now. They're reaching fully feathered status, and they're going to start leaving their natal nest boxes soon to head out to sea for the first time. So that's exciting. And then probably the one species that is dominating all of our senses right now are the Western gulls. So we have the largest population or aggregation of Western gulls in their range. There's probably about somewhere in the range of 13,000 individuals that breed on this very small island. So it is quite chaotic this time of year. The Western gulls, once those chicks hatch, they can be very aggressive. They like to dive bomb our heads. They like to poop on our faces and on our data books. They scream pretty much 24 hours. So they're definitely a presence on the island, and I think you can see some of them in this view now. We had the camera posted up on a nest. So they had just started hatching their chicks. The Western gulls can have a clutch of 3 eggs, up to 3 eggs, and those little fuzzy chicks are now getting fed for the first time and are starting to grow. So in a couple of weeks, we should see them developing their wings, and a couple more weeks, they'll start flapping them, and a couple more weeks, they'll be leaving us. So that's what's going on out here. Because it's World Oceans Day, I suppose we should talk about what sort of projects relate directly to ocean conservation. And one of the most, I think, exciting projects that we've started in the last couple of years are some tracking studies, like Lishka mentioned. So we've been putting GPS tags, just like you have in your phone, devices on these birds that birds are going when we don't see them in the non-breeding period. So once the allow us to figure out what sort of habitat they're using during the winter period and what sort of conditions drive their movements, and what sort of prey they rely on, and also what kind of threats they may face during the winter period. So if we're talking about conservation, we really need to have a complete picture about what happens throughout their entire year, not just during the breeding season. So yeah, lots of tracking studies with the gulls. We've had some groups with some researchers coming out here to track those. I guess for what I'm doing, the pigeon guillemots have been a new, fun, exciting project. So we're putting what are called geolocators on these birds that record ambient light levels, and we can use that information to estimate where they are throughout the year. And an exciting find is we're finally figuring out where these pigeon guillemots go during the winter period. They're actually making a migration all the way up to British Columbia and Southeast Alaska. So sort of the threats that they may face during the summer here will be very different than the threats they may face during that winter period. And like I said, this is going to be sort of an informal Farallones Live. I don't really have a script, so I'm hoping that you guys will have some questions for me. And if you do have any questions, please write them in the Q&A section, and we'll try to address those. Anything at all, what sort of food we like to eat out here, what's it like to be a research assistant, you know, it doesn't have to be seabird related or ocean related. Any questions so far that we got? Oh, it looks like we have one.
Can you tell us the 11 species that are nesting?
Sure. Let's see if we can get people to guess the 11 species. So we can work through that. So we have 3 types of cormorants out here. Can anyone tell me? Can anyone name those 3 cormorants in the Q&A? Getting any responses? Pelagic cormorant is one. Yep. So we have a fairly small population of pelagic cormorants. There's probably about 150 individuals that breed out here, give or take a few, 50 or so. What else do we have? Any other guesses?
We got Heather, who got pelagic and double-crested. Susan also answered the call.
Good job, Heather and Susan. Yes. Brandt's cormorants are our biggest population out here of cormorants. Probably, I think, I'm trying to, off the top of my head, about 8,000 of those, maybe a little bit more. Brandt's cormorants have the blue gular pouch, and if we didn't have this fog, you'd be able to see some pretty dense colonies back behind me. Yes, and the double-crested cormorants, a very small population of those that nest only on one small section on the islands. So good work. We also have 2 types of gulls. I pointed out the western gulls here, and then we have a small, very not really viable breeding population of California gulls that usually fail because the western gulls consume their chicks. California gulls are a bit nicer, I suppose, than the westerns. We've got, let's see, 5 types of alcids. Let's see, we've got the tufted puffin, common murre, which is a big success story we can talk about, pigeon guillemots, Cassin's auklets, and the rhinoceros auklet. So 5 types of alcids, and the alcids are the birds that use their wings to basically fly through the water column. So they're diving seabirds that propel themselves underwater with their wings, unlike penguins or grebes, which use penguins use their wings, sorry. Grebes and other birds that use their feet, cormorants, to swim through the water. We have the ashy storm petrel, which is a species of concern out here. So we have basically half of the world's population of ashies breed on the Farallones. And so we, in fact, Tatiana just started some monitoring efforts for those, where we have a little endoscope, I guess you would call it, a little burrow cam that you fish through their crevice with a little camera on the end and a light, and you can see the little tiny storm petrel over its egg inside its burrow or crevice. And she's saying we have lots of ashies today on this check, which is good. We like to see that. I think we got through. There's probably some I forgot, but those are the main ones that we really care about. In fact, I really like the alcids. That's my bias.
The common murres, Tara would like to know what's going on with them.
Yeah, so the common murres, like I said, are a big success story. Oh, sorry, we wanna hear more about the common murres. Repeating the question, yes. So their eggs were once heavily harvested for people in the early days in San Francisco during the gold rush. And so that population took a really big hit out here, got down to some very low numbers. And since the ban of the egging activities and since the conservation efforts out here have, since they started, the population has basically just exploded. So we're up to probably a little over 300,000 murres that breed on Southeast Farallon Island alone, with additional colonies on North Farallon, which is about 7 miles to the northwest of us. So it's great to see that population expanding and growing. We could maybe pan around and show you Fertilizer Flat, I suppose. Should we give that a shot? So bear with us, folks. We may experience technical difficulties, but we're gonna try here. We can probably take it off the tripod, right? Yeah. So keep those questions coming. We're just gonna see if we can give you a different view of the island here in the meantime. See if we can pan. We're getting a sense of what the gulls sound like as we move around the island. Pretty much every time we start moving, they're activated, and they let us know that they're in charge up here. Now we're hitting the northwest wind, so So just down below this area here, I'm not sure if you can see it, but there's a massive colony, a really dense colony of murres, probably, I'm just guessing here, but maybe 100,000 or so on Fertilizer Flat, maybe a little bit less. Can they see that on the camera, Tatiana? Does it look good? Okay. So they fulfill basically the same niche as a penguin does in the southern hemisphere. So they're very similar to penguins, but they're not related. They lay a single large egg just on the rocks, usually in sort of on ledges or on slopes and in the windy side of the island, so they have good lift when they take off, because they're very robust birds and they're not the greatest flyers, so they don't tend to breed on the leeward side of the island. But you're getting a sense of the colony down there. I think that's probably good. We can go back. We can thank Lucas for his great camera skills. So some other studies that we do that relate to ocean conservation are our diet studies. And this time of year, like I said, the chicks have hatched. So some of the parents are starting to provision their young at this point. And we can actually use these birds as ocean samplers. So rather than having to pay for an expensive ship to drive around the ocean and sample the water, we can just have the birds do it for us. And so we just post up in our research blinds or on the side of the colonies with our binoculars, and we simply watch the birds fly in with whatever fish they're going to feed their chicks. So things like murres and guillemots, pigeon guillemots, will carry a single fish to their chick in their bill, and it kind of sticks out. And so we can track those birds flying in, identify what sort of prey they're bringing, what size of prey, and that tells us some really great information about what sort of prey is available in the vicinity of the island. So if in certain years a lot of birds are bringing in a lot of anchovy, we know that the anchovy population around here is doing well. And in years where, say, anchovy is absent, that tells us there's something going on with the ocean that's limiting the anchovy's abundance and distribution. So they're really efficient way to get an estimate or an idea of what's going on in the oceans in the Gulf of the Farallones. And that helps us to inform fisheries management, and it helps us to track basically the health of the ocean. Other species are a little trickier to get diet from. So the Cassin's auklets, they're foraging on krill, and they store the krill in their gular pouch. And so at night we'll post up in their colonies, and as they crash down to find their burrows, we grab a few birds here and there and collect their gular pouch sample. It's a really, they don't seem to mind too much, but it's a great way to figure out if there's a lot of krill in the area. So they're great ocean samplers. And speaking of krill, we just had 3 blue whale sightings this morning before the fog rolled in. So that's telling us that there's probably some krill in this area. So anyway, any other questions in the chat?
Lori would like to know what the total population of birds is right now. How does this change over the year, and how does that relate to ocean health?
The total population of all. So Lori wants to know what's the total population of all the birds on the island, and how does that change from year to year? Yeah. Right. So it's hard to give a good number for that. Some of these birds are actually quite difficult to count. So we have estimates for their population, but I would say somewhere in the range of maybe 500,000 seabirds total on the island. And that certainly changes year to year. And a lot of this is what we're tracking are actually breeding individuals. So in some years when ocean conditions are poor, some of these birds just won't initiate breeding. And so their population may be a certain size, but the individuals that are showing up to the island to breed might be lower. So that's part of what drives that interannual difference. And we certainly see in some years, for example, in El Nino years, a lot of the breeding populations will be a lot lower than what we see in more typical years where upwelling strength is normal or good. So we can count some of the smaller populations, but a lot of like the murres, we're using index plots and things to estimate their breeding size. And so it can be tricky to really get a good idea of how their population is changing. And a lot of it has to do with winter survival and with recruitment rates. So a number of birds that are surviving the winter to come back and breed the next year, and the number of birds that are surviving the juvenile period to recruit back into the population to breed themselves. So those are the things that are driving differences in population size. Good question, Lori.
Are there any raptors on the island? Can you discuss the predators that seabirds face?
Yeah, great question. So the question was, are there any raptors on the island, and can we talk about some of the predators? It's a question from Heather. Great. Thank you, Heather, for that question. Raptors, we do have occasionally some burrowing owls, which reside on the island. We get peregrine falcons, usually maybe 3 or 4 a year, that potentially are breeding on the island. It's sometimes hard to find their breeding sites. So those are the 2 main, and barn owls sometimes show up. And the owl species are taking typically the Cassin's auklets and ashy storm petrels, and the peregrine falcons are going after Cassins and rhinos, pigeon guillemot, some of the larger species. But those predators are in pretty small numbers, so it doesn't really have a major impact on some of these populations. The biggest predator actually is the western gull. So they will catch anything that shows up in their territory, even neighboring gull chicks, and they will destroy them. So they're pretty aggressive and territorial during the breeding season. So they take quite a few, mostly Cassin's auklets, and they'll grab a couple ashies here and there if they can catch them. So those are the main predators, and we don't have any necessarily any mammals on the island. We do have house mice on the island, but they're not necessarily directly predating on, as far as we can tell, on some of these seabird species. So those are the predators. Yeah.
Have we ever seen a hummingbird on the island, and what kind of other birds come visit the island?
Have we ever seen a hummingbird on the island, and what sort of other birds? This is considered to be a birding hotspot. I have to admit that I am not actually a birder, which might be confusing for some of you. So yes, we do see hummingbirds. We see Annas, Rufus, a few others. And we do get a lot of vagrants during the spring and fall migrations. Mostly in the fall, we see some pretty unusual species that get lost at sea, and they seek refuge on this small island, especially when you have a high ceiling and they can't see the stars for navigation. So yes, we do get quite a few songbirds. In fact, our fall season focuses on studying the fall migration of songbirds and how those patterns have changed over the years. And they do a lot of mist netting and banding during that time of year. Yeah.
How long does it get used to the smell on the island?
So the question was, how long does it take to get used to the smell on the island? And I don't even notice it my first day, really. So I guess maybe a couple days. The biggest smell are probably the sea lions. So there's a pretty robust population of California sea lions that haul out and pup on the island. And then the sea lion colonies can be very aromatic. I don't know if the right word for that, but it's very, very smelly. And then of course the bird guano, it's a very it hits you, especially the Murrah colony on a wet day. But generally speaking, you get used to it. I mean, they're pooping on you constantly. Oftentimes they'll poop in your mouth, or I have a mustache, they poop in my mustache. So it can be unpleasant. You have to have a lot of patience to be out here during the breeding season. So good question. Yeah. Anything else in the chat?
We've got, how do we get to the island?
Yeah, okay, so one question is, how do we get to the island? And so yeah, we don't have a beach or anything to land on. We have 2 cranes essentially. So we have East Landing, which I think the camera might be pointed at now. You can kind of see a little pocket of water down there at Gulch. So we have a really awesome volunteer fleet of folks from the Bay Area that volunteer their time and their vessels to get us out here. So every 2 weeks, we have a supply run for food, and then we sometimes exchange crew members during those 2-week periods. And there's a buoy just offshore of the island that we tie up to, and then we have a boat on the island that we will launch with a crane into the water. And that's how we go back and forth between the mothership and the island. So yeah, volunteer fleet called the Patrol Run, and we really thank those folks if anyone's tuned in for their efforts to get us out here.
Don would like to know how hot it gets in the summer and we can tie into that why it's so foggy right now.
Yes, good question, Don. How hot does it get in the summer, and how does that tie into the conditions that we're currently seeing with this fog? So just offshore of us, we have some really warm, moist air, and when it hits the California coast, so for those of you, just a quick reminder, we have some really strong currents that bring cold water up to the surface. It's called upwelling during the summertime, and it's driven by these northwest winds. And so that cold water at the surface, when that warm air offshore hits that cold water, it forms this marine layer, it's fog. And it's sort of our natural air conditioner out here. So it very rarely actually gets hot on the island. We are seeing, though, as we track the changing climate, that we're potentially seeing more of these extreme warm events where, you know, the upwelling conditions might relax and all that warm air offshore doesn't cool down, and the influence of the mainland works its way out here. And sometimes it can get to be in the 90s or hotter on some of those extreme heat events. And the seabirds really feel that. They're not typically used to having to endure those types of temperatures. So some of the surface nesting birds will start to overheat. And even some of the burrow nesting birds, if their burrow's not deep enough, will start to feel the effects of that heat. So that's why it's foggy now. And so yeah, typically it's, I don't know, in the 50s or 60s out here. It's usually quite pleasant. Yeah.
What inspires you most about the Farallones in the ocean, and what has been an exciting moment of learning or discovery?
What inspires me personally most about the Farallones in the ocean, and what's been an exciting discovery? I really enjoy how dynamic the ocean can be, how different it is from day to day and from year to year. It's sort of never a dull moment out here. There's always a surprise to anticipate, you know, a rare species of whale showing up, or a rare type of seabird. We had a horned puffin last year, which is not that common here. So it's just those pockets of surprises that you get throughout the season. And there's just so much to learn about the ocean. I mean, the questions seem endless. And so it's been really fun to dive into some of these data sets that we've collected over the years to sort of tease out these really minute patterns in what these birds are doing. I think the most exciting thing that I've experienced, I think, has been these tracking studies where we get to reveal some of their lives when they're not in visible range from us, when they're just off the viewfinder of our binoculars. So that's been really fun to do.
Kevin would like to know what you eat on the island.
Kevin wants to know what we eat on the island. We eat really well. So I've been on several island projects over the years, and by far the Farallones has the best food budget. We get fresh produce every 2 weeks. We have an endless supply of snacks usually, and so I would say we eat very well. Last night we had barley salad with some nice, we called them, what did we call them?
Bean balls.
Bean balls. But it doesn't sound appetizing, but they're quite tasty. And we have a full kitchen with all the essential supplies. And so a lot of times people who are out here get very creative, and it's an opportunity to learn to cook. Basically, it's a sort of a blank slate for some people. So yeah, we eat very well. I had some goldfishes for a snack before doing this, to be specific. So I'm gonna have a bagel sandwich when this is over. So.
Since you've been to many different islands, why did you choose this line of research, and what is your interest?
So the question is, since I've been to so many islands, why did I choose this line of research? And to be quite honest, I just sort of fell into it. My first season in 2012 was a pretty formative season for me. I really just was so impressed with the variety of studies that we do out here. So anywhere from banding birds to diet studies to handling, you know, it's just all sorts of different projects. So I was really impressed with that. And then it mostly just luck and right place at the right time, I think. I just found these data sets and decided to go to grad school, and the rest is history, as they say. So I'm certainly, there are times where I get tired, and mostly because of the gulls, but overall it's been a great experience, so yeah.
Sheldon would like to know why or how the research we do is relevant to people who aren't working in this field.
So Sheldon wants to know how the research we do is relevant to people who are not working in the field of seabirds, I'm guessing, and just science in general. That's a good question, Sheldon. That's a complicated one. Certainly, like I said, with sort of the diet studies that we're doing, we're informing what sort of conditions are happening around this part of the world. So, seabirds are sampling the ocean in a pretty small buffer around the Farallones, so it's kind of local to the Gulf of the Farallones. But it does help us, like I said, track the potential health of the ocean. So, like I said, rather than having to invest in this expensive equipment, we can just use these birds to sample the environment for us. And the oceans are important in so many ways. They provide so many services to us. So if we can use seabirds just to use as a general gauge for ocean health, I think that's sort of the biggest impact that that might happen to other folks. That's a complicated question, and I am quite distracted, so not the best answer, but I hope that was something. So,
do the sea lions interact with the birds or compete for resources?
Do the sea lions interact with the birds or compete for resources? They do forage on the same things. So sea lions will also eat anchovies and other prey that the seabirds are targeting on. And oftentimes they'll form these mixed species feeding frenzies offshore. So the sea lions and the birds will work to drive the anchovy up to the surface, and even whales will come in and take advantage of that bait ball. So there is some competition there for some of the fish species, and also the castens auklets are eating the same thing as the blue whales are eating, krill. And in terms of breeding real estate, so the sea lions are generally hauling out on the lower, sort of along the intertidal zone or the high tide mark of the island, and sometimes the marine terrace. So there are places where, as the sea lions move up from the water, they can crush some of the castens burrows down on the marine terrace. But for the most part, they're not really climbing high up on the island. It's a pretty steep relief in most places. So,
in regards to ocean and seabird conservation, what gives you hope?
In regards to ocean and seabird conservation, what gives me hope? It's a philosophical question. It's hard to find silver linings these days. But I think with these long-term studies, we are finding that some of these species are actually quite resilient to climate variability. Just as an example, the castens auklets, which I studied for my PhD, yes, we see that they're responding to these warm water events, that it does have an impact on their survival and overall breeding success. But we've also seen that despite these extreme events, they have a pretty high capacity to recover from them. And there's actually a whole, floating population of birds out there that will fill in the gaps left behind by some of these birds that don't make it during these poor periods. So that's been an interesting find. It's not always doom and gloom. Species can shift their ranges if they need to. So it's not all bad. There are some silver linings out there, but it is sometimes hard to find. You have to sort of look hard. But I guess that's what gives me hope, is knowing that some of these species are quite resilient to changes. A bit of a rambling answer. I didn't realize there'd be this many questions.
That's great.
We love the questions, yes.
Dawn would like to know if we do nighttime studies, and how come our lights from the house do not impact the birds?
So Don wants to know if we do night studies, and he wants to know how we mitigate our impact, our footprint with our lights from the houses. That's a great question, Don. So for the second part, we're really diligent about closing all the curtains in the house. We have blackout curtains on both houses that we live in. And so that reduces the light pollution from our from our houses, and there's no external lights or anything except for the one on top of the lighthouse. And yes, we do night work. So we track ashy storm petrel population numbers by mist netting. So we, twice a month when the conditions are good, we set up a mist net and we have a social attraction call we play, and the birds will fly in and hit the nets, and we ban them as part of a market capture study. So that's probably one of the most fun projects that we can do is the ashy netting. It's fun to see these seabirds that are almost never seen by people on land suddenly show up in the nets, and you get to handle them. So that's really a treat. And then just at dusk, when the rhinoceros auklets are flying in, we also net those to collect some fish samples for our diet studies with the rhinoceros auklets. And the Cassin's auklets are nocturnal as well, so our diet studies happen at night for those birds too. But mostly the ashies are the night work. Yeah.
Back to the house and the food situation. Do we ever run out of food?
Back to the house and the food situation. Do we ever run out of food? We try to avoid running out of food. So no, if for whatever reason the landing gets canceled, we generally have a pretty good supply of rice and beans and canned food just in case the fresh stuff becomes limited. So it's never happened, and we want to keep it that way. We like to eat out here.
Have we seen sharks along the shoreline? What do they eat?
Have we seen sharks along the shoreline, and what do they eat? So yeah, sharks are actually one of our big study species in the fall. So the sharks show up in September or so, and they stick around for a few months. And so we will come up to this lighthouse when the conditions are good and look for shark attacks. They're generally going after the elephant seals, but they do take some of the other pinnipeds as well, California sea lions and southern sea lions, but elephant seals are the big ones they're going after. And so we track how many attacks happen each season, and then what they're going after for that. And that's pretty exciting. Pretty exciting stuff. I think are we almost out of time? 5 more minutes. I think we've covered quite a lot. Are there any closing questions before we wrap things up? Maybe I'll show you one more chick before it's time to go.
Just have another ashy question.
Okay, one more ashy question.
Significant or interesting have caught ashies?
Have there been any significant or interesting catches during the ashy netting sessions? Yes. We sometimes catch fork-tailed storm petrels, least storm petrel, black storm petrel. I think we had, I'm drawing a blank. There's been a few other pretty interesting rarities, but I can't remember them off the top of my head. Again, I'm not a birder. Just want to point that out. But yes, it is possible. So I think we're kind of towards the end of our event. Thanks for all the awesome questions. That really helped me not have to prepare much for this. So I appreciate that. It's been, like I said, this is the peak time of year, so we're quite busy out here. But we're happy to show you our island. So let's just wrap it up with another look at our fuzzy chickens. That's how we call it. Maybe Lishka, if you could chime in. So thanks again. I just want to point out, you guys can check out our website at pointblue.org. And if you go to /events, you can see what's coming up next in terms of this live series. What we're trying to do every month is bring you into the field and show you the science that we do. So please check in again for the next event, and also explore our website for any information that you're looking for our organization or for our science. So thanks again, everyone.